affirmation today, I choose what happens inside of me. And this is a very poignant statement because so often in life, we feel so affected by the things that are happening outside of us. We go through our day and we may have a financial challenge, and so we feel anxious or upset. And that's an external thing that we are allowing change we're feeling inside. And of course, I think we're all very aware that the way that we feel inside, the way that our attitude and our mindset is, sets up our whole day for us. So if we're bogged down with anxiety or fear or concern or anger or upset, of course, that's going to set the path for your whole day. And we know that as New Thought students and just as human beings going through the life experience, that what we desire is to have days filled with great joy and great happiness, fulfillment. And so what we need to be aware of is the fact that we do choose what happens inside of us. So as you get up in the morning, you're talking to yourself and saying, today I choose what happens inside of me. So if you find yourself in a situation or a circumstance that you feel is affecting you, you know what, you woke up and my gosh, the water heater was broke, you had to take a cold shower. And so that's something that might tend to put somebody on the bad path for the day. And you think, no, I'm entitled to feel angry and upset because I don't have any control over it. The cold water, this outside factor, changes what's inside of me. But then it's time to stop and, recalculate and say, no, I choose what happens inside of me. So as you go through the week, as you go through your chores and your processes, our question this week, and the question ask yourself is, do I let what happens outside of me affect what happens inside of me? I may have mentioned that I went out of town for the week, so I was going to have some downtime and playing time and all that. So I got to read this wonderful novel, and it's so interesting because it was one man's journey, and he meets these 7 different characters, and at the end of each chapter, he gets these incredible lessons, and they were so New Thought centered. They were absolutely consistent with our New Thought beliefs. And in one of the characters that he meets happens to be Anne Frank, because he goes back in time a lot and meets different people. So he meets Anne Frank, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of the Diary of Anne Frank and what a challenging situation that was. And to think of a young teenage girl to have this mindset, to know that she chooses what happens inside of her. So during his meeting with her, he looks about, and of course, as many of you recall, they were very challenged. There were very limited food available. There was limited space between her and her sister. They had 3 dresses to share. And so this character asks Anne Frank, how can you be so, how can you have so much positive energy? How can you be so happy and pert when I look about and I see you have very little food and you're cramped in this little space? You haven't seen sunlight for a couple of years. You only have these 3 dresses. And her response is that she chooses to be inside how she needs to be. She doesn't let these outside factors affect her. And that's very fascinating for such a young child to grasp that concept. She said in her mind, she was grateful that they had these friends on the outside who were willing to give up part of their rations to share with his family. And she said the 3 dresses, she thought they were very lucky because some girls only had 1 dress, but they had the option to change every now and again. So everything she looked at, she chose what happened inside of her. And that, of course, is very poignant and meaningful because, as I was saying, we can all get into these circumstances and situations where inside we're mad or we're sad or we're anxious, and we think that it's because of these things happening in the outside world, and they're forcing us to be in this circumstance, in this situation inside. And we need to be aware of the reality that they aren't. They aren't. The only reason they are upsetting us inside is because we're allowing them to. So we have to put up that brick wall and stop that challenging feeling from coming in and know that we choose what happens inside of us. I had mentioned last week, I spent this week with a good close friend of mine who was recently diagnosed with colon cancer. And so he's going through chemotherapy and radiation treatment. And so between his friends and family, because he was originally from Long Beach, everybody's going up to spend a week or so with him as he goes through this process. And as I was preparing to go up there, I was feeling a little bit of a burden because I think that in this role, in this faith leadership role, there is the thought that, you're always going to have the right thing to say. You're going to make everything perfect and wonderful. And it's interesting to me because it's easier sometimes to go see an absolute stranger in the hospital if you get a call, because, we have this faith belief and you can just share that information with them. Also, it's easier, actually far easier, to see somebody in our own faith because that person understands our new thought principles. And so it's easy to share that and be uplifting. But if it's a close friend who doesn't share your new thought principles, that I've found to be an incredible challenge, because I didn't want to, we're not a proselytizing faith, so I didn't want to impose my belief on this person. But at the same time, I wanted to, share a lot of our new thought ideals as he was walking through this process. And so, like about the second day after we were all settled in and we got to talking about it, I was really flabbergasted because this friend of mine had been in a relationship years ago with somebody who abused substances. So he went into Al-Anon, which many of you may know is the program for the people who are with the people who have substance abuse issues. And I was amazed because it was really wonderful. I mean, it was so easy for me to speak with him because even in this Al-Anon program, they embrace so much of our own new thought beliefs. And I was just delighted to hear his thoughts on it. I mean, he wasn't upset at all. He said, this is the process I'm going through. I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to understand whatever happens. Because he's at a point now where, as I mentioned, they're doing the chemotherapy and the radiation therapy, and they're hoping to eliminate the cancer without operating. Because if they operate, they have to take a big part of him out, and then that's going to change his whole life because he's going to need an external device. And he's about my age, which I like to say is young, relatively young. And so, nobody wants to think of somebody having to go through that. So, of course, the main goal is that this treatment is going to eradicate the cancer and the surgery won't be necessary. And so, of course, I'm, holding on to that and praying for that. But this person, because of our new thought concepts that he is exposed to through the Al-Anon, he's so comfortable with it either way. He's just not freaking out. He's not crying. There's no pity. There's such great attitude because you know what? He chose what happens inside of him. And obviously he didn't choose for the cancer to be inside of him. And that is kind of an external factor. But he chose not to let that affect how he's feeling or what's inside of him. And again, that's because of our new thought principles. So as new thought students, we, of course, can embrace these same thoughts and ideals and know that no matter what's happening out in this external plane, in this external world, none of it is really real. Because as Pastor Mike used to talk about, nothing out there is real. Everything out there is what we've created in our mind. We create our reality. And we know that's a standard new thought principle, that we do create our reality. And once in a while, we are going to come across some challenges. Lord knows, if there aren't the hills and the valleys, wouldn't life be boring if we just walked across a desert plain? So there are going to be those challenges. And in addition to the external challenge is to not let that change what happens inside of you. People get so upset and so consumed with these ideas of things from the external world that they're allowing them to change how they are inside. And they're becoming afraid and they're creating huge monsters out of nothing because they're not controlling what's happening inside. Ask yourself, do I let what happens outside of me affect what happens inside of me? And starting Monday, when you wake up, even if your hot water tank blew up and there's a hole in your roof and the car won't start and the freeway's jammed, be positive, be uplifted, and know that you choose what happens inside of you. Of course, we'd love to be able to choose what happens outside of us, and to some degree we do, but as I mentioned, there are going to be the hills and the valleys, and that's just the reality of life. That's the human experience. That's what we have to do. But part of the human experience is choosing what happens inside of you. So you be happy, you be uplifted, you be positive as you greet every challenging circumstance and situation. So I choose what happens inside of me. So go out this week, meet every day, and choose what happens inside of you, and you'll see what an immense difference it makes.